Remember when I finally got that carving done on Captain Stump's base? That afternoon was thick with fog too. Honestly, I told him, we're going to build something magnificent here. Best mates. He just blinked those big, unreadable eyes, but I needed him to hear it, so I puffed out my chest like I owned the whole damn coastline. The salty air smelled so sharp that day, like raw iron mixed with brine. It felt like we were making a treaty, not just scratching a name into wood. Blast it all, this muck has gripped me like a clumsy hand. I shall wrestle this emerald beast of earth until I am free of its clutches, mark my words. I remember a night, years back, when the ocean just decided to stop making noise. It was like the whole vast expanse had swallowed up every whisper of the waves, just a sheet of polished obsidian under a bruised twilight sky. Everything was unnervingly still. Even the cicadas seemed to have taken a collective nap. I sat out on the sand, feeling that deep, peculiar quiet settle into my bones like warm silk. I spent what felt like an eternity just listening to the lack of sound, watching the faint, iridescent film that covered the water surface. Then, this fox, a creature of pure velvet shadow, trotted right up to my boots, sniffing at my worn boot leather with an almost polite curiosity. It sat down, tail tucked neatly, as if it, too, were waiting for a sound that never arrived. I looked at the fox, then out at that glassy water, and it hit me. The silence wasn't an absence. It was a solid thing, a message carved into the air itself. It was saying, "Wait a minute, Robinson, something else is happening here." That quietude was more profound than any crashing breaker ever could be. It felt like the island holding its breath with me. Look at the vibrant green jungle spilling down past the ridge. It's a riot of color, like a painter threw every pigment on a canvas. Pretty little ducky waddles by. Look at his jaunty little gait. Aren't you a proper little feathered gentleman, aren't you? Look at the stars sprinkled across the black velvet. They hang there like scattered grains of spilled sugar. Oh, a duck just strutting by. What a comical little splash of yellow in all this gray mess. Wonder if he knows the tide's coming in soon. These timbers are going to give me a cozy little fortress. Wilson, we need a proper place to keep the damp night air out. Remember that tooth, Wilson? It was the dull ache. A persistent little drill boring right through the bone until I thought my jaw might just split open like overripe fruit. I was sitting on the beach, the tide whispering secrets against the sand, and I had that jagged piece of slate and that stupid, shiny blade-eyed pride from a crate. The pain was so bad, it was humming up into my sinuses, making my teeth feel like they were rattling loose in their sockets. I remember the grit of the rock against my gum, the awful, sharp pop as the whole thing finally came free. It felt like a tiny, sick victory. I spat the thing out into the surf, and it bobbed there, looking alien and useless. The rush of cold air into the empty spot was almost a shock, a dizzying gasp of pure, sudden relief. And even now, when I laugh too hard, but when I talk to you, I feel that little phantom wiggle, a tiny reminder of the day I fixed a problem that had nothing to do with schedules or parcels. This wretched patch of dirt has clamped down on me like a vengeful octopus. I'll tear myself from this verdant grip until my knuckles bleed like a map of forgotten constellations. See how the pale moonlight catches the dust motes dancing above the jungle floor. It looks like spilled glitter caught in a spider's web. Twinkling lamps of constellations are scattered across the deep ink of the sky, like spilled jewels on black cloth. Stars tonight are so bright they look like someone spilled a whole jar of powdered moonlight out here for us. When the autumn winds blew through the eastern cliffs, I found the bird bones spread out like a scattered, ivory-stained glass mosaic, every feather perfectly preserved. I just sat there, watching the gulls circle, not daring to breathe too loud lest the whole fragile arrangement collapse back into dust. After hours of just staring at the beautiful symmetry, I took a piece of charcoal and etched a tiny, almost invisible crescent moon symbol deep into the cover of the book I call the library. I kept that little secret mark hidden away, a private little tally of moments that only the tide and I would ever know. You know, when the sun finally dipped behind those western peaks and the air turned thick and oily with the scent of salt and decaying seaweed, that's when the whispers started. It wasn't the usual gentle lapping sound. Oh no, this was a deep, resonant thrumming that seemed to vibrate up through the soles of my feet, right into my knee joints. I was sitting out by the high tide mark, just watching the shadows lengthen like spilled ink when the water itself seemed to sigh. Then, cutting through that heavy, humid quiet, came the sound of it, a slow, wet exhalation, like a mountain clearing its throat underwater. I was convinced I was losing my mind, thinking it was just the echoes bouncing off the cliffs, until the water parted just enough to show it. There, suspended in the momentary darkness, was the massive, liquid eye, reflecting the dying sky like a polished, enormous amber coin. It wasn't menacing, you know, it was just observing. And then, right beside my knees, a little brown chicken, completely unfazed by the giant creature, pecked at a piece of driftwood as if nothing supernatural had just occurred. It just walked right past the sheer presence of the whale and pecked at the wood, treating the spectacle like a routine afternoon snack. It was the most wonderfully normal thing that could have happened in that moment of profound mystery. This little duck seems thoroughly snagged in the mud. I wonder if this whole island is just a giant trap for poorly planned wildlife escapes. Little fowl waddles right over here, looking at my boots like they hold the secret to true happiness. Gather close, Wilson, and let me tell you about the day the island spoke, if you can believe such a thing. It wasn't the crash, or the endless, rhythmic sigh of the surf. No. It was a quiet evening, the air so heavy with jasmine and the musk of damp earth that it felt like breathing velvet. I was sitting near the edge of the clearing, tracing patterns in the cooled volcanic ash, thinking about how absurdly predictable everything here has become. Suddenly, the jungle went silent and complete, a natural vacuum where even the cicadas paused their scraping song. A sound rose up from the deep green growth, not a roar, but a kind of drawn-out, breathy question, like the island itself clearing its throat. I remember thinking it was the wind catching a hollow root, but then the low murmur came again, seeming to wrap around my ankles like warm, damp moss. I looked around wildly, expecting some grand, mythical creature to emerge, but then I saw it, a cow, a placid, rather large creature with patches the color of old coffee, simply chewing cud about 20 feet away. It didn't look scared of the noise, it looked concerned by it. It shifted its weight, its great head tilting slightly toward me, as if waiting for my answer to whatever secret query the jungle had posed. And I answered it. I swear it. By just reaching out and patting its flank, accepting whatever terms the deep earth had laid out for me to live by. My whole lower half is trapped in this miserable clod of earth. I shall wrench myself free like a rusty anchor dragging through the deep silt. Whenever I try to stack these beams too high, it always reminds me of that first poorly constructed watchtower. I remember the splintered wood giving way with a pathetic crack under the midday sun. The first time I built a whole section that leaned, I was so furious at my own clumsy hands that I cursed the grain of the cedar until the entire thing listing like a drunk sailor. That taught me that rage is structurally unsound. You see, and the floor, well, the floor always screams when I walk too fast, like it's complaining about the rhythm of my footsteps. Do you remember those fancy little calling cards? The ones with the embossed crests and the fancy script, smelling faintly of expensive, imported ink. I used to have to hand them to people standing on thresholds the moment a delivery was done. The transaction was complete, and the scent of their foyer, old beeswax polish, and stale potpourri would hit you like a wave. I recall one afternoon, the rain had just stopped, and the air smelled overwhelmingly of wet slate and cut grass, and I was supposed to drop off a small box to a solicitor whose name I could barely pronounce. He had this ridiculously shiny silver pin clip to his waistcoat, and when he took the package, his fingers brushed mine in momentary contact. Nothing more, but it felt like a jolt of pure electricity that shot right up my arm, making my whole arm feel fuzzy, like it was buzzing with trap bees. I remember thinking, in that instant, that this was the most vibrant thing I had ever felt, more real than the satisfying thunk of a sealed container. Then, he nodded, smiled that tight, professional little smile, and handed me a crisp, cream-colored business card that felt impossibly smooth under my thumb, smelling faintly of sandalwood and obligation. I looked at that card, Wilson, and I wondered if I would ever smell anything that pure and perfectly orchestrated again. Hark! This muddy embrace has